The first thing she noticed when she woke up was the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then the memories came flooding back. This was the third time this week she had ended up here, curled up next to him in his warm bed. She turned her head slightly and watched him sleep. His breathing was steady and peaceful, so different from the restless nights she had been having at her own place. There was something about being here that made all her worries disappear, at least for a few hours. The divorce papers were still sitting on her kitchen table at home, waiting to be signed. Her lawyer kept calling, asking when she would be ready to move forward. But every time she thought about taking that final step, her chest would tighten with anxiety. That's when she would find herself walking to his apartment, telling herself she just needed someone to talk to. But deep down she knew it was more than that. She needed his presence, his warmth, the way he listened without judging. When she would show up at his door late at night, shivering not just from the cold but from everything falling apart in her life, he would simply open his arms and let her in. He stirred beside her, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw her looking at him, a small smile crossed his face. "You're awake early," he said softly, his voice still thick with sleep. "I couldn't sleep anymore," she replied, pulling the blanket closer around her shoulders. "I keep thinking about everything that's happening." He propped himself up on his elbow, giving her his full attention. This was one of the things she loved most about him. When she talked, he really listened. Not like her husband who would nod while scrolling through his phone or watching television. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked gently. She had been carrying so much weight on her shoulders for months now. The marriage had been over in her heart long before the papers were filed, but actually going through with the divorce felt overwhelming. There were so many decisions to make, so many things to divide up, so many conversations with lawyers and mediators. "I feel like I'm drowning," she whispered. "Every day there's another phone call, another form to fill out, another meeting to attend. And through it all I just feel so alone." He reached over and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "You're not alone," he said. "You have people who care about you." She closed her eyes at his touch. This was exactly what she had been missing. Simple kindness. Someone who saw her struggling and wanted to help, not because they had to, but because they genuinely cared. "I know I shouldn't keep coming here," she said. "It's not fair to you. You have your own life, your own problems to deal with." "Hey," he said, making her look at him. "I want you to come here. I want you to feel safe somewhere." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight with emotion. When was the last time someone had made her feel wanted? Not as a burden, but as someone worth caring for. They lay there in comfortable silence for a while, watching the morning light get brighter through his bedroom window. She could hear the city waking up outside, people starting their daily routines. But here in his bed, wrapped in his warmth, everything felt still and peaceful. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the quiet moment. He reached for it, and she saw his expression change as he read the message. His ex-girlfriend's name appeared on the screen, and she felt something twist in her stomach that she didn't expect. "Everything okay?" she asked, trying to sound casual. He set the phone back down without responding to the message. "Just someone from the past," he said. But she could see something had shifted in his mood. She knew she had no right to feel jealous. They had never talked about what this was between them. She came to him for comfort, for warmth, for a break from the chaos of her life. But seeing another woman's name on his phone made her realize that somewhere along the way, her feelings had grown into something deeper. "I should probably get going," she said, starting to sit up. "I have a meeting with my lawyer this afternoon." He caught her hand gently. "You don't have to rush off. Stay for breakfast." The simple invitation made her heart skip. He wasn't trying to get rid of her. He wanted her company even in the daylight hours when they both had to face the real world. "Okay," she said, settling back down beside him. "But I'm buying the groceries next time." "Next time?" he asked, and there was something hopeful in his voice. She realized what she had said. "Next time." As if this was going to keep happening. As if whatever this was between them had a future beyond her late-night visit seeking comfort. "I mean, if that's okay with you," she said quickly. He smiled, and it was the first genuinely happy smile she had seen from him in a while. More than okay. As they got up to make breakfast together, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Maybe her life was falling apart in some ways, but maybe something new and beautiful was beginning to grow in the rubble. She watched him move around his small kitchen, making coffee and toast, and realized that what had started as her seeking his warmth to sleep had become something much more significant. She wasn't just looking for physical comfort anymore. She was falling for him, and that changed everything. The coffee shop was busier than usual when she walked in for her lunch break. She had been thinking about him all morning, replaying their conversation from yesterday. The way he had looked at her when she mentioned next time kept making her smile at random moments during work. She ordered her usual sandwich and found a quiet table by the window. Her phone buzzed with a text from her lawyer, reminding her about the meeting tomorrow to discuss the final details of the divorce settlement. Just reading it made her stomach twist with anxiety. Well, look who we have here. She looked up to see her estranged husband standing next to her table. Her heart immediately started racing. They had agreed to give each other space during this process, communicating only through their lawyers unless it involved their teenage daughter. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I could ask you the same thing," he said, sliding into the chair across from her without being invited. "You're never at your apartment anymore when I call. Where have you been spending your nights?" The question felt like an accusation. She knew she didn't owe him any explanations about how she spent her time, but something in his tone made her defensive. "That's none of your business anymore," she replied, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup for comfort. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "It becomes my business when it affects our daughter. She's been asking questions about why you're never home when she tries to call you in the evenings." Guilt hit her like a punch to the chest. She had been so caught up in finding comfort and peace at his place that she hadn't considered how her absence might look to her daughter. The divorce was already hard enough on her without adding more confusion. "I've been dealing with a lot," she said quietly. "Sometimes I need space to think." "Space to think or space to be with someone else?" he asked. And there was something cruel in his smile. "Because my friend works in that neighborhood where you've been parking your car. Says he sees it there pretty regularly, always overnight." Her blood ran cold. She had been so careful, or so she thought. But apparently not careful enough. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, but even she could hear how unconvincing she sounded. "Let me be clear about something," he said, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied expression. "If you're seeing someone else, if you're having some kind of affair, that's going to come up in court. That's going to affect everything we've discussed about custody and support." The word affair hung in the air between them like a threat. She wanted to explain that it wasn't like that she had been separated for months before she ever met him, that she was only seeking comfort during the hardest time of her life. But she knew anything she said would only make things worse. "You can't prove anything," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Can't I?" He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. It was her car parked outside his apartment building at night. "Like I said, my friend is very observant. And very helpful." She stared at the photo, feeling trapped. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. Her need for comfort, for warmth, for someone who understood her, was now being twisted into something ugly that could be used against her. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "I want you to remember what's important here," he said, putting his phone away. "Our daughter needs stability. She needs to know that her mother is focused on the right things, not running around town looking for attention from random men." The casual cruelty of his words made her want to cry, but she refused to give him that satisfaction. She had done nothing wrong. She was a grown woman going through a divorce, seeking comfort from someone who cared about her. There was nothing shameful about that. "I need to get back to work," she said, standing up and gathering her things. "Think about what I said," he called after her as she headed for the door. "Think about what matters most." The rest of her workday passed in a blur of anxiety and worry. She kept thinking about what he had said, about how her relationship with him might affect her daughter. The last thing she wanted was to hurt her child or complicate the divorce proceedings. By the time evening came, she found herself walking toward his apartment building without even realizing she had made the decision to go there. Her feet had carried her there automatically, seeking the one place where she felt safe and understood. She stood outside his door for a long moment before knocking, trying to figure out what to say. How could she explain that their peaceful morning together had been shattered by threats and accusations? How could she tell him that their connection, which felt so pure and healing to her, was now being painted as something sordid and wrong? When he opened the door and saw her face, he immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, stepping aside to let her in. She collapsed onto his couch, suddenly feeling exhausted by everything that had happened. "We need to talk," she said. "About us, about what this is, about whether we're making a terrible mistake." The rain was hitting his apartment windows harder now, creating a steady rhythm that seemed to match her heartbeat. She had been sitting on his couch for the past hour, telling him everything that had happened at the coffee shop, about the confrontation, the threats, the photo of her car, and how scared she was about what it all meant. He listened without interrupting, occasionally reaching over to squeeze her hand when her voice started to shake. When she finished talking, they sat in comfortable silence while the storm continued outside. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "I never wanted to drag you into all this drama." "You didn't drag me into anything," he replied, turning to face her fully. "I chose to be here. I choose to care about you." The way he said "care about you" made something flutter in her chest. It was different from how he usually spoke. There was something deeper in his voice, something that made her look at him more carefully. "What are we doing here?" she asked softly. "I mean, really doing?" He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him thinking carefully about his answer. "At first, I thought I was just helping a friend who needed someone to listen," he said. "Someone who needed a safe place to sleep when the world felt too heavy. And now," she whispered, "now I think about you when you're not here," he admitted. "I find myself hoping you'll show up at my door, not because you're running from something, but because you want to be here. With me." Her heart started beating faster. This was the conversation she had been both hoping for and dreading. The one where they stopped pretending this was just about comfort and warmth and admitted there were real feelings involved. "I think about you too," she said, her voice barely audible. "More than I should, probably." He moved closer to her on the couch, close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Why more than you should?" "Because I'm still technically married," she said. "Because I'm in the middle of a divorce. Because my life is a mess right now, and you deserve better than someone who comes to you broken." "What if I don't want someone who has it all figured out?" he asked, reaching up to touch her cheek gently. "What if I want someone real, someone who's been through things and knows what it's like to hurt and heal?" She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "This is scary," she whispered. "I know," he said. "It's scary for me, too." When she opened her eyes, he was looking at her with such tenderness that it made her chest tight with emotion. This wasn't the look of someone offering temporary comfort to a friend. This was the look of someone who had feelings, real feelings for her. "If we do this," she said quietly, "if we cross this line from friends to something more, there's no going back, and it might make everything more complicated." "Some things are worth being complicated for," he replied. The space between them seemed to shrink until there was almost no distance left. She could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, could see the way his eyes kept glancing at her lips. "Are you sure?" she asked one more time. Instead of answering with words, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, like he was giving her a chance to pull away if she wanted to. But she didn't want to pull away. She wanted to lean into this feeling, into him, into the possibility that maybe something beautiful could grow from all the chaos in her life. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we figure it out as we go," he said, running his fingers through her hair. Together, for the first time in months, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. Not just the hope that her divorce would be finalized smoothly, or that her relationship with her daughter would survive this difficult time, but hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find happiness again. They spent the rest of the evening talking about everything and nothing, about their fears, their dreams, their favorite movies, and the foods they hated. It was the kind of conversation that happened when two people stopped holding back, stopped pretending they were just friends, and started being honest about wanting to know everything about each other. When it got late, she didn't automatically assume she would stay the night. This felt different now. They had crossed into new territory, and she wanted to be intentional about every step they took together. "I should probably head home," she said, even though every part of her wanted to curl up next to him and fall asleep in his arms. "You don't have to," he said, "but I understand if you want to take things slow." She appreciated that he wasn't pressuring her, wasn't assuming that one kiss meant everything had changed overnight. It showed her that he respected her and the complicated situation she was in. "I want to stay," she admitted, "but I also want to do this right." Whatever this is between us, I want it to be real and honest and not just me running away from my problems. He smiled and kissed her forehead. Then stay because you want to be here with me, not because you're running from anything else. I want to be here with you, she said, and meant it completely. As they settled into his bed together that night, everything felt different. The desperation was gone, replaced by something warmer and more hopeful. She wasn't sliding into his sheets seeking escape anymore. She was choosing to be there, choosing him, choosing to believe that even in the middle of her life falling apart, something wonderful could still bloom. The phone call came at exactly 9 a.m, just as she was getting ready for work. She had been humming while making coffee, still thinking about the wonderful evening she had spent with him. For the first time in months, she had woken up feeling genuinely happy. "This is Attorney Johnson calling on behalf of your husband." The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. "We need to schedule a meeting to discuss some new developments in your case." Her stomach dropped. "What kind of developments?" "We have evidence that suggests you've been engaging in a romantic relationship during your separation period. This could significantly impact the custody arrangements and financial settlement we've been negotiating." The coffee mug slipped from her hands, shattering on the kitchen floor. Evidence. They actually had evidence. Her worst nightmare was coming true. "I don't understand," she said, even though she understood perfectly. "My husband and I have been separated for months. I'm allowed to see other people." While that may be technically true, the timing raises questions about the validity of your marriage breakdown claims. "We'll need to discuss this in person. Can you be here at 2 o'clock today?" She hung up the phone with shaking hands and stared at the broken pieces of ceramic scattered across her kitchen floor. Everything was falling apart just like that mug. The happiness she had felt this morning seemed like it had happened to someone else, in some other life where things were allowed to be simple and good. By noon, she couldn't concentrate on anything at work. Her mind kept racing between worst-case scenarios. What if they took away her custody rights? What if her daughter had to live with her father full-time? What if all the progress she had made toward independence and happiness was destroyed? Because she had dared to find someone who cared about her, she found herself walking toward his apartment building without even planning to go there. She needed to see him, to talk to someone who understood, to figure out what this all meant for them. But as she climbed the stairs to his floor, doubt started creeping in. Was this fair to him, to drag him into a legal battle that could get messy in public? He had his own life, his own career to think about. Maybe the kindest thing would be to end this before it got worse. He opened the door with a smile that immediately faded when he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" "They know," she said simply, and watched his face change as he understood exactly what she meant. He pulled her inside and listened while she told him about the phone call, about the meeting with the lawyers, about how everything they had built together was now being used as a weapon against her. "This is my fault," she said, pacing around his living room. "I should have been more careful. I should have waited until everything was finalized before getting involved with anyone." "Hey," he said, catching her hands and making her stop pacing. "This is not your fault. You're going through a divorce, not serving a prison sentence. You have every right to find happiness, but what if it costs me my daughter?" she asked, and her voice broke on the words. "What if trying to be happy destroys the most important relationship in my life?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him thinking. Finally, he said, "What do you want to do?" The question she had been dreading, because she knew what the smart thing to do was, even though it would break her heart. "I think we need to stop seeing each other," she whispered. "At least until all the legal stuff is finished. I can't risk making things worse." She watched something dim in his eyes, even though he nodded like he understood. "If that's what you think is best." "It's not what I think is best," she said, tears starting to fall. "It's what I think is necessary, and I hate it." They stood there in his living room, holding hands but knowing they were about to let go of each other. The unfairness of it all was overwhelming. Just when she had found someone who made her feel whole again, the universe was forcing her to choose between him and everything else that mattered. "How long?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," she admitted. "Months, maybe longer." The lawyer said this could drag things out significantly. He pulled her into a hug and she breathed in his familiar scent, trying to memorize it. "I'll wait," he said into her hair. "However long it takes, I'll wait for you." "That's not fair to ask of you," she protested. "You should move on. Find someone whose life isn't such a disaster." "My life was pretty much a disaster before I met you too," he said with a sad smile. You made it better. You made me better. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that what they had was strong enough to survive the separation. But she had learned the hard way that wanting something wasn't enough to make it happen. That night she went home to her own apartment for the first time in weeks. Her bed felt cold and empty, and she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The next morning, she met with her lawyers and learned the full extent of what she was facing. Photos, witness statements, a timeline of her visits to his apartment. Her husband's legal team had been thorough. "We can fight this," her lawyer said, "but it's going to be expensive and messy, and there are no guarantees." She thought about him, about the way he had held her while she cried, about how he had said he would wait for her. Then she thought about her daughter, about the custody agreement, about everything she stood to lose. "Do what you have to do," she told her lawyer. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect my daughter, even if it meant giving up the one person who had made her feel alive again." 3 weeks had passed since she had seen him. 3 weeks of sleepless nights, mechanical days at work, and putting on a brave face for her daughter. Every morning she woke up hoping the ache in her chest would be a little less, but it never was. She was sitting in her lawyer's office, reviewing yet another stack of documents, when she finally reached her breaking point. "I'm tired of being afraid," she announced suddenly. Interrupting her lawyer mid-sentence, he looked up from his papers, surprised. "I'm sorry?" "I said I'm tired of being afraid," she repeated, sitting up straighter in her chair. "For months I've been letting fear control every decision I make. Fear of what my husband might do, fear of what the court might think, fear of losing custody, fear of being judged. I'm done." Her lawyer set down his pen and looked at her carefully. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to tell the truth," she said, feeling lighter already just from saying the words. "Yes, I've been seeing someone. Yes, I care about him deeply. And yes, I was separated from my husband for months before anything romantic happened. I'm not ashamed of finding someone who treats me with kindness and respect." "That's a risky strategy," her lawyer warned. "The other side is going to paint this as an affair regardless of the timeline." "Then let them," she said, standing up. "Let them explain to a judge why a woman going through a difficult divorce shouldn't be allowed to find companionship and support. Let them explain why seeking comfort from someone who cares about you is somehow wrong or shameful." She left the lawyer's office feeling more determined than she had in weeks. She was done hiding, done apologizing for trying to rebuild her life, done letting other people's opinions dictate her choices. But first, there was something she needed to do. Her daughter was waiting for her when she got home from school, sitting at the kitchen table with homework spread out in front of her. At 16, she was old enough to understand that her parents' marriage was over, but young enough to still be hurt and confused by all the changes. "Mom, can we talk?" her daughter asked, looking up from her math homework. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Her daughter fidgeted with her pencil for a moment before speaking. "Dad's been asking me a lot of questions about where you go at night, about whether you're seeing someone. He makes it sound like you're doing something wrong." Her heart broke a little. This was exactly what she had been afraid of, her daughter being caught in the middle of adult problems. "What do you think?" she asked gently. "I think you seem happier than you have in a long time," her daughter said quietly. "And I think Dad is angry that you're moving on while he's not." The wisdom in her 16-year-old's words took her breath away. "You're right," she said. "I have been happier. I met someone who's very kind to me, who makes me laugh, who reminds me that I deserve to be treated well." "Are you going to marry him?" her daughter asked with the directness only teenagers possess. She laughed, surprised by the question. "Honey, I'm not even divorced yet. But someday maybe, if he'll still have me after all this drama." "Why wouldn't he still have you?" "Because I got scared and pushed him away," she admitted. "I thought I was protecting you and protecting him, but really I was just protecting myself from taking a risk." Her daughter was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know what you always tell me about taking risks?" "What's that?" "You say the biggest risk is never taking any risks at all." She looked at her daughter, this wise, wonderful young woman, and felt a surge of pride and love. "When did you get so smart?" "I learned from watching you," her daughter said with a smile. "Even when you don't think you're being brave, you actually are." That evening, she found herself standing outside his apartment building again, but this time it felt different. She wasn't running to him for comfort or escape. She was choosing to be there, choosing to fight for something that mattered. She climbed the stairs with purpose, her heart beating fast, but not from anxiety. From hope. When she knocked on his door, it took a long moment for him to answer. When he finally opened it, she could see the surprise and wariness in his eyes. "Hi," she said simply. "Hi," he replied, not moving to let her in. "How are you?" "Terrible," she admitted. "I've been miserable without you. And I've been an idiot." Something shifted in his expression. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I let fear make my decisions for me," she said. "I convinced myself that staying away from you was protecting everyone. But really, I was just taking the coward's way out." He stepped aside to let her in, and she walked into his familiar living room, noticing that it looked somehow sadder than before, less lived in. "I told my lawyers the truth today," she continued, "about us, about how I feel about you, about the fact that I'm not ashamed of caring for someone who treats me well. And I told my daughter the truth too." "How did that go?" he asked quietly. "Better than I expected," she said with a small smile. "Turns out the people who really love you want you to be happy, even if it's complicated." They stood there looking at each other, and she could see him trying to decide whether to let himself hope. "I don't know what's going to happen with the divorce," she said. "It might get messy, it might take longer than expected, it might cost more money than I have. But I know I don't want to face it without you." "Are you sure?" he asked, "because I can't do this again. I can't have you in my life and then lose you again because you get scared." "I'm sure," she said, stepping closer to him. "I'm sure because these last 3 weeks without you have been the longest 3 weeks of my life. I'm sure because my daughter thinks you make me happy, and she's right. I'm sure because I'd rather face whatever comes next with you than face anything without you." He reached for her then, pulling her into his arms, and she felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in weeks. "I missed you," he whispered into her hair. "I missed you too," she said, "and I'm not going anywhere again." As they held each other in his living room, she realized that this was what courage actually felt like. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. Not the guarantee of a happy ending, but the willingness to work toward one. Outside, the city continued its evening routine, but inside his apartment, they were beginning again. Building something real, something honest, something worth fighting for.